go. And Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shekidsanu b'mitzvotav etzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So now let me share my screen and we can get to the text. Okay, so I have us here on page 43 in our Koran edition. And if you're looking on Safaria, it's right here, it's 8A. And it is just, if you're looking in Safaria, it's like a few paragraphs below the Mishnah. Anyway, so we had the Mishnah way back was about, these are the festivals of the Gentiles, Calenda, Saturnalia, Cratesis, and the day of the festival of their kings, and the birthday of the king, and the anniversary of the day of death of the king. Okay, so all of these are the festivals in which we're not allowed to do business with Gentiles 3 days before and 3 days after. So then there's Gemara about what exactly these festivals are and how do you remember the difference between Saturnalia and Calenda. Okay, and then we had Midrash, where we left off about Adam. All right, so you think the Romans are the ones to set the calendar. No, Adam is the one to set the calendar. Okay, so typical in rabbinic literature to say that everybody thinks the Romans are God's gift to infrastructure and humanity because of all the modern technology the Romans are doing, right? Building roads, bathhouses, bridges, beautiful temples and buildings. So you think they're great. No, they got it from us. So that's the rabbinic idea here. So we had left off, just a second here. That's 42. I'm sorry, we're on page 42. We had left off, so let's start here. The Gemara raises a difficulty. No. Let's go here. The sages taught. We'll start with this. We had left off here, and Rav Yehuda says, but let's go just one paragraph before. The sages taught, on the day that Adam, the first man, was created, when the sun set upon him, he said, woe is me, as because I sinned, the world is becoming dark around me, and the world will return to the primordial state of chaos and disorder. Now, just before we continue with the story, the primordial state of chaos and disorder, which is tohu vavohu, which is the second verse of the Torah, is before God created anything. Then there was the first day of creation in which God separated the waters from land, and the second day of creation, the sun, moon, and stars, and then vegetation, and then fish, and birds, and animals, and then Adam, and Adam and Eve, not until the sixth day. So how did they, on the sixth day, know about what happened before they were created? So that's a question, but that's a logical question to ask, which sometimes cannot be asked of Midrash, which is illogical. By that I mean that the rabbis are teaching these lessons with forcing us to suspend normal logical reasoning. Okay, so the logical reasoning here is somebody to be asking the question, well, how did Adam know about this primordial state of the world before he was created? Like, he didn't go to school And no textbook said 5 days ago that was chaos. And this is what happened 4 days ago, and then 3 days ago, 2 days ago, and 1 day ago. There was no such textbook like that. They were the first people on earth who told them this. The Torah doesn't say that God told them what happened before the world was came out of chaos. Go ahead, Debbie or Jesse. You have to unmute.
Good.
There you go.
So I'm intrigued by this idea of chaos and disorder.
Yes.
Which I presume is the literal translation. I mean, it's the literal
Yes.
translation of the Hebrew word that you just mentioned.
Right here, this phrase that I'm highlighting here with my cursor, tohu vavohu. Yeah,
Okay.
It's hard to translate that. Robert Alter, who is a English professor at Berkeley, also wrote a book like 40 years ago called The Art of Biblical Narrative, and now is famous in the Jewish world for his translation of the Bible. So, he just to further interrupt you, Jesse, before you ask your question, let me just read to you how he translates it. And here we go. Because again, tohu vavohu has a poetic kind of rhythm to it. So he translates it welter and waste. So okay. I don't know what welter means, but it has in English the language of tohu vavohu, which usually is utter chaos or formless and void, or what this is, chaos and disorder. Okay, so go ahead.
Right. Well, that sort of gets to the point, which I was going to say that to me, chaos and disorder implies something very different than welter and waste, which implies nothingness. Chaos and disorder is like a Hobbesian state of nature, which is clearly not what the sages intended, because they are talking about creating something out of nothingness, not out of chaos and disorder, if you know what I mean.
Right. No, that's true. That is true. Yes.
But actually, welter doesn't mean an absence. It means a lot of things.
A lot of things, yes.
A large number of items in no order, a confused mass.
Yep.
Which
Confused.
is what I think
yes.
we're looking for.
So, yeah. So in Jewish thought, let me say it this way. According to the Torah, something was there already before God entered the scene and created the way that created Earth as we know it. So in other words, there was a blob, and God then came on the scene and worked with the blob to create what we have. So that's what the Torah says. According to the rabbis, there are different traditions here that God created something out of nothing. That, even though the Torah doesn't say this, the rabbis will say that God created the blob. Okay, and that the Torah pre-existed the blob. Okay, so this isn't a discussion about Torah, but when it comes to the Torah, that's the rabbinic perspective on it, that the Torah, not only did God write the Torah was, God created the Torah before God created anything else. And that is to teach us how foundational Torah is to everything in the universe. In other words, the universe cannot exist without the Torah. Okay, so this idea that God created the universe or the world is not there in the Torah. There's a blob there, and the Torah raises many questions. Where did that blob come from, and where did God come from, And what prompted God at that moment to pay attention to the blob and do something about it? No idea. No idea. So it raises lots of questions, whether you believe that God wrote the Torah or whether you believe people wrote the Torah. All right. So all of this is not the purview of this midrash here. This midrash is just about Adam and this whole idea of when the sun, that just the vernal equinox or whatever. So let's get back to this midrash. So I raised all of this, and Jesse's question too adds to all of this, just what's in the background as this midrash comes along. So on the day that Adam, the first man, was created, when the sun set upon him, he said, "Woe is me, as because I sinned, the world is becoming dark around me, and the world will return to the primordial state of chaos and disorder." In other words, he's created, sun's up in the sky. Wait a second, he's saying, the sun's going down. So according to this story, Adam thinks he did something wrong in order to cause the sun to go away. It's scary. Where's the sun going? Okay, and this is the death that was sentenced upon me from heaven, Adam says. Oh, but the death wasn't sentenced to him yet. Garden of Eden hadn't happened yet. So it's a merger of different stories, assuming that Garden of Eden had happened already, and Adam knows ahead of time that he's sentenced to mortality. He spent all night fasting and crying, and Eve was crying opposite him. Once dawn broke, he said, "Evidently the sun sets and night arrives, and this is the order of the world." He arose and sacrificed a bull whose horns preceded its hooves in the order that they were created, as it is stated, "And it shall please the Lord better than a bullock that has horns and hooves." This verse is referring to the one particular bull whose horns preceded its hoofs. All right, so I can't really comment on this because this is bizarre. And I just don't know where this is coming from, why they're looking at that verse in Psalm 69 and applying it to the Adam and Eve story and to a Thanksgiving sacrifice that Adam is making to God for causing the sun to rise on his second day of existence.
I have a
So
question.
I don't know about that. So I can't comment on that. The Torah has nothing. The first sacrifices are Cain and Abel in chapter 4. So don't know where this is coming from. But, and Rav Yehuda says that Shmuel says that the bull that Adam, the first man, sacrificed had one horn in its forehead, as it is stated, "And it shall please the Lord better than a bullock that has horns and hooves." And the Hebrew word for horns, makrin, could be read as keren, one horn. The Gemara raises a difficulty. Isn't makrin plural, which indicates two horns? Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak says, mikeren is written, that is, the letter yud is missing from the word, indicating that there is only one horn. Okay, so bizarre story about Adam sacrificing a bull on in Thanksgiving for the dawn of the second day. Steve.
So you say the rabbis sort of suspend logic here. Do they take this story then literally that it really happened, or do they know that they're just making up a story to make a lesson?
That's a good point, Steve. I think what? Like right, like the Haggadah with Michael is saying here, like the Haggadah with that part right before we do the dipping of the wine for the 10 plagues. There's a question: how many plagues were there? Were there 10 plagues? Were there 50 plagues? Were there 200, 250 plagues? Right. So yeah, how much do the rabbis really believe the stories that they're creating. I'm not sure. I'm really not sure, Steve. I think they're believing the lesson that comes from the creation of the story. So in other words, they may not believe that Adam actually sacrificed a bull on the first day of creation. But I think they do believe that Adam and Eve were aware of their mortality and that they were grateful to God for their existence. Because there's lots of things in the Torah that are written cryptically. And for the rabbis, it's important to teach their community how great these characters in the Bible were. So I don't necessarily think that the rabbis believed that what they wrote in their stories were true, but I do believe that the lessons that they wanted to teach are true. All right, so I'm just saying it that way, and I'm not a Talmud professor. I don't have a PhD in Talmud, so a PhD in Talmud would have to answer this question better. But from what I've learned and the years of study, this is what I would say. That's how I would answer your question, Steve. That the rabbis firmly believed in their ideology, and they created stories in order to teach their ideology to the people.
So even the ultra Orthodox sit there and study the Talmud all day. When they come upon these stories, they focus more on the lessons of the stories and not so much on the literal story.
No, I would say that the stories, the ultra Orthodox believe that these stories are true too. So if you were to ask if an ultra Orthodox Jew was sitting here, which he wouldn't be sitting with us. But if he was sitting here studying page 42, page 8a of Avodah Zarah, he would say, okay, Adam and Eve sacrificed this one-horned bull. And if the rabbi said it, it must be true. And that will go down and in ultra Orthodox canon as true, that Adam sacrificed a one-horned bull. Okay, I, as a non-ultra Orthodox Jew, don't believe that this story is true. I do believe that the rabbis created this story in order to teach a lesson. The ultra Orthodox go one step further and say, this, the Talmud, and that, the Torah, are both from God at Mount Sinai.
So would they be allowed to question the logic then of the story?
Yeah, right. So for them, that's also a good point, Steve. Right. At Yeshiva University, one can get a doctorate in Talmud. At the ultra Orthodox yeshiva, such a concept of a doctorate does not exist. There's no such thing, because doctorate implies standards that are set by the academy, whatever academy of standards of granting the permission, the authority to a particular academic institution to grant PhD degrees. And there are required courses and standards that academic institutions need to follow in order to be granted the authority to be a degree granting institution. So ultra-Orthodox yeshivas do not subscribe to that American authority to give degrees, okay? Smicha, which is rabbinic ordination, is different from PhD. So I have a master's in Jewish arts from the Jewish Theological Seminary, which my master's is a what's the word I'm using looking for? It is accepted by all players. I can go and show my transcript my master's certificate, any place, and I would be understood as having a master's degree. But if I said, but I can't do anything with my rabbinic ordination, that and $2.50 gets you a cup of coffee at Starbucks. So my rabbinic ordination is worthless in the academic world. Okay, in the Jewish world, it's not worthless. In the academic world, it's worthless. So the same with a smicha from the ordination from an ultra orthodox yeshiva. So what all of this to say, if you have a PhD in Talmud from Yeshiva University, which is an Orthodox institution, but not ultra orthodox, you subscribe to the scientific theory of studying things, and therefore study Talmud in the way that we study Talmud and the way academics study Talmud, which is to question everything about it. In the ultra orthodox world, no, you would not study Talmud in that way. You study, so we're studying Talmud for the fun of it, and to understand some things about, the mindset of the rabbis of 1500 years ago, and to learn some interesting things. But in the ultra-Orthodox world, they study Talmud for the mitzvah of studying Talmud.
Yeah, just
Okay.
not to dwell on that too much longer. One more point. It just seems inconsistent, because it seems like the Talmud, all they're doing is arguing back and forth about what this means or what that means, or this, that, or the other thing. And they go into all this detail. And yet on this story, nobody questions the logic of it. It just seems very
yes.
weird.
Now that is true. So they're only questioning, if there's a question about a story like this, it's a question about the proof text. So like here, the proof text is Psalm 69, verse 32. So the only question about this story is not about, did Adam really sacrifice a bull? Or did Adam really sin on the first day that those would be the religious questions I would ask about the story. The only question that's recorded about the story, how do you know that bull had one horn? I mean, in the scheme of questions, the scheme of things, possible questions you'd ask about the story, who really cares whether the bull had one horn or not? But that's the question from here, and it's based on this particular word in Psalm, in the verse, and how it's vocalized. And here it can be vocalized differently to be understood as one horn. Oh, okay. So then this rabbi is satisfied then. Okay, if you're using that as the proof text, I accept that as the proof text. So wait, but Lori she has her hand up. Go ahead, Lori.
Yeah, I think it was you probably just answered it, but my understanding of yeshivas is that and Jewish values and tradition is that there's a big emphasis on arguing, having, a study buddy and getting, not agreeing on things. But maybe what you're saying is there's a certain things you don't go outside of.
It's what you're arguing about.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So in other words, in the yeshiva, first I'm moving back and forth like this to kind of get in the mindset of the yeshiva bacher studying, and then I'm going to do my thumb thing too. So the back and forth between the chavruta, the man and his study partner, is about how, first of all, they're looking at the text on this side here, and it doesn't have vowels and it doesn't have punctuations. So they're arguing about how to pronounce the text. And then secondly, they're arguing about the logic that is brought forward in the text itself. So really, the more important text would be a text from Baba Metzia about civil law and about, if you have a cistern in a public property and your bull falls into the cistern, then who's responsible for the injury to the bull? Is it the owner of the cistern, or is it the owner of the bull? And that's the kind of argument that would be important in the yeshiva, not necessarily did Adam sin on the first day of creation, and a more of a religious theological argument that you don't really necessarily have in Chavruta. And I don't think they'd see this story, they see it as a break from the kind of back and forth about the more important point, which would be Jewish law. This story has nothing to do with Jewish law. It has to do with Jewish religious values, which in the yeshiva and the back and forth of Chavruta, it does not happen. Those religious values are taught in lectures by the rebbes of the yeshiva, with no back and forth by Chavruta. So in other words, the Rebbe of the ultra-Orthodox yeshiva would give a sermon, and then he would never say, now I'd like you in Chavruta to discuss my points and argue why against my belief in God or my understanding of good and evil. That would not happen in the ultra-Orthodox yeshiva. It would just be presented as fact, and you move on. Okay? All right. Yes, Michael.
Yeah, it's just from an editing point.
Yeah.
Since the Talmud is written in a spare form.
Yeah.
Because they couldn't possibly say everything that had happened. You've got outline, you've got condensations, you've got whatever. But even knowing that, they put these stories in there.
Yes.
And so it's just from the point of view of the book being edited.
Yes.
You have to wonder,
Yeah.
you really have to consider this, because clearly it was thought to have been important.
Yes.
And it wasn't just people sitting around trying to
Yes. I
play games with
absolutely
this.
agree with you, Michael.
Yeah.
Absolutely agree. And I think it's just my perspective, and I'm not denigrating ultra-Orthodox. Ultra-Orthodox just have taken Talmud and just have decided to do one thing with it that is different from what the Talmud, the editors of the Talmud and the rabbis mentioned in it meant. So what I mean by that is that it's clear that the Talmud is all about give and take and debate. And it's not just about matters of Jewish law, but it also matters of theology and theodicy. All of those are important matters. And so when we studied, and it's clear also that there's a development in the thinking of the rabbis from one generation to the next. So that's why I think that non-Orthodox Jews have it right when it comes to how we understand Judaism today, that Judaism is a dynamic process meant to be questioned, meant to be reinterpreted in every generation. So I think that that is the authentic way to be Jewish today. And those who try to find the original intent of the Talmud and try to live life by the original intent, that's a fruitless task. And I think it's also wrong. So if I just insert a little politics here too, that would be about the Constitution of the United States as well. To try to find the original intent of the founding fathers and the author of the Constitution is wrong, because I don't think anybody in their right mind, when they write law, especially constitutional law, I think they never intend for that law to be observed this way to eternity. Law just does not work that way, because society changes. So a legislator needs to word the law in a way that allows for flexibility. So an example of this, the Torah says a man shall not lie with a man in a manner of lying with a woman. That is an abomination. All right, so the Torah says it seems pretty clearly. So the conservative movement went through hoops and great contortions to allow for gay marriage against what seems to be the very unambiguous statement in the Torah. So, but they did that because of precedent, not particularly about that law, but about other laws in which the rabbis went through hoops and were contortionists in interpreting law. When another unambiguous statement in the Torah is an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. And the rabbis clearly said in the Talmud, no, that's monetary compensation. That's not to be understood literally. What gave them the right to do that? So, okay, so we digress, but it's anyway, there are major ideological differences between all the denominations of Judaism when it comes to how we understand the foundational texts of our tradition. And we all denominations see them as sacred text. It's just that all the denominations do something differently with these sacred texts and also think differently about how they impact how they're supposed to impact our lives today. Okay, so any other questions? Yes, Bess?
Two things. First, when we finish the digression, can we go back to see what the note was about the bull? Because
Okay.
Okay,
Sure.
but now my digression added, I'm listening very hard and thinking about what you're saying, but in the back of my mind, I'm hearing, hey, there are parallels to the thinking of the unabstract thinking that was happening then when the rabbi sat down and what's happening today. And I try not to be political, but how some people will believe what is obviously not true.
Yes.
I don't just, the election was stolen, or I don't want to use a political example, but that's the kind of thing I'm thinking of. And then you have a man in front of a rally who is saying things that he is saying, these are my beliefs. If you follow me, this is what you believe.
So I see where you're going with this, and okay. I think there's a difference between religious beliefs, in other words, what we believe about God, and what we believe about science. And I think the rabbis are cognizant of that they understand very well, to the best of their ability 1,500 years ago, they firmly believed in the ways of the world and how science worked, how our bodies worked, and they would never teach anything that goes against that. So in other words, they firmly believe that it was perfectly acceptable for people to pursue a career as a doctor. Okay, so medical science was the rabbis believed in that, knew that there is science in the world around us, understood how the world worked. I mean, even this conversation about dawn and dusk and sunrise, sunset, all that, stars in the sky, the rabbis, to the best of their ability, understood that. And even in the Middle Ages, once it became accepted that the world is round and the earth orbits the sun, rabbis did not deny that. Rabbis did not deny that, because it seems from the Torah that the way the Torah presents it, the universe is earth-centered and everything revolves around the earth. But the rabbis, once science clearly proved that the earth revolves around the sun, had no problem with that. So the only thing that really suspends logic is belief in God. Okay, and I'm saying that as a religious person, that belief in God suspends logic. Or let's say it this way, it requires a leap of faith. So my belief in God is logical. My theology is logical. There is, a Jewish theology is a logical system, but it's all based on making a leap of faith, because no one can prove beyond the shadow of a doubt that God exists. Okay, so there's a difference between standing up in front of a crowd and saying the election was stolen, and people professing on social media today the election is stolen and there's no climate change, or there are the Jews built lasers in outer space to start the forest fires in California. There's a difference between that and saying God exists. Okay, so Jews throughout all time, normative Judaism throughout all time is fact-based, except when it comes to belief in God. Okay. All right. So the note that Bess is referring to about the one-horned bull, or that the horns preceded the hoofs, the sages explained that all the creatures that were brought into existence at the beginning of the world were created as adults. This is why its horns preceded its hoofs, unlike a normal ox, which is born without horns. Some commentaries explain that this bull emerged from the ground with its head before its legs. Okay, so, if you're going to comment on a midrash like this, which is already unbelievable and illogical, then the commentary on this is even more so. Like, in other words, in trying to bring logic into an illogical story is kind of bizarre. But anyway, that rabbis did engage in that. Okay, so now another topic based on the Mishnah. And we're going to have to stop in about 5 minutes. Rav Matana says, since Rome established the festival of Calenda on a specific date, and all of the nearby towns are ruled by Rome, that is, they pay their tax to Rome and provide its needs, but do not themselves celebrate the festival, is it prohibited or permitted to engage in business transactions with the Gentile residents of those towns? In other words, maybe the people in the towns don't celebrate Calenda, but we live in the Roman Empire, which has the official federal holiday of Calenda. Is it okay to do business with someone who doesn't celebrate Calenda, even though they're not Jewish? So that's an interesting question. Are you allowed to do business with a Christian on Christmas if they don't celebrate Christmas? They're Christian, but they don't celebrate Christmas. It's okay to do business with them. Interesting.
Business with a Sikh.
Or can you do business with a Sikh on Christmas? Right. Yeah. Okay. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure how diverse the Roman Empire, the Palestine was under the Roman Empire. How many different kinds of ethnicities lived in Palestine 1,500 years ago? In Palestine, were there Zoroastrians in Palestine? There were in Babylonia. I don't know about Palestine. Not sure. But
the Babylonian Talmud.
This is yes, but right. Yeah, that's true. And it's the Roman Empire did exist, still existed at the time of the Rebbe. Okay, so anyway, is it okay to do business with a Gentile on Calenda with a Gentile who doesn't observe Calenda? Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi says it's prohibited to engage in business during the time of kalenda with everyone. Blanket statement, doesn't matter whether they observe it or not, can't do business. You never know what they're going to do with the profits from the business. Rabbi Yochanan says it's prohibited to engage in business only with its worshipers, whereas it is permitted to engage in business transactions with Gentiles who do not celebrate the festival. So they're not celebrating the festival. You don't have to worry that the profit is going to buying an idol to celebrate the festival. Okay, or to get a fancy meal to celebrate the festival. They're not observing. What difference does it make? All right, so Yochanan is the liberal guy here. Yehoshua is the fundamental conservative guy. No blanket statement, no business. Yochanan, well, if they don't worship, you can do business. Now, how do you find out if they don't worship? That's the legit. Are you asking somebody in the marketplace, someone clearly not Jewish? It's 3 days before Kalenda. I'll sell this to you, but tell me first. I'll only sell this to you if you tell me whether you observe the Kalenda or not. Is that normal in business? Like, I'm not sure that that's like today, right? You can't restrict sales in a store for any reason. Somebody has the money, that's all that you need. You just need money to buy. You don't ask questions of what they're going to do with the product afterwards. Yes, Lori.
Yeah, I mean, that makes me think about how do you handle a situation like that anyway? There's a rule you can't sell to them. Do you just, the only way not to somehow communicate that is to just not sell to anyone. Those just close down for a
Do you
few
have a
days.
sign? Do you have a sign in front of your stand in the marketplace? I'll only do business with people who don't observe Kalenda.
Or
I don't
even
know.
even if the general rule is I won't do business with Gentiles. I mean, that's,
Well, so then, right. So I don't know. I don't know how that actually worked in the marketplace and how you survive doing business that way, only doing business with Jews. It's possible that that's the case. I mean, I don't know. There used to be this magazine, this throwaway magazine called Who, What, Where, When. That's the kosher markets had. And it's mainly published from Baltimore. And it's all the advertisements for businesses there were people who are Shomer Shabbos, right? So you want a plumber, the best thing to have a plumber, if you're Jewish, is to have a plumber who's Shomer Shabbos. You don't want any, so you better have a Jew do business in your house, and the Jew who's doing business in your house with you should be an observant Jew. You buy a car from an observant Jew, you go to a doctor who's an observant Jew. Okay, in a segment of the Jewish community, that's important. And perhaps that's how the Jewish community was in the time of Babylonia. There were those who restricted their business just with other Jews because it's just safer to do business with Jews as a Jew. You don't have to worry about the non-Jew getting upset with you and then bringing the authorities and maybe throwing you in jail for whatever trumped up charge that a non-Jew could do. So it could be safer. So if you're going to do business with Gentiles, you're taking your life in your hands maybe. And then if you're going to do that, then it's even harder. If you're going to do business with a Gentile, you're going to ask a Gentile, do you worship Kalenda? And then refuse to sell to them? I don't know how how practical this would be. So Michael has a question, and then we'll stop here.
It's not the same thing, but in a modern similarity, there was a Supreme Court case about the baker who would not sell to the male homosexual couple.
Right, the wedding
People
cake.
asked, and
That's right.
my office mate once got a request to, if he was a Christian, he should sign up with the Christian Yellow Pages, and there, so that he could do business with other good Christians.
Right. Right.
It's not just Jews.
It's absolutely not just Jews. And yeah, so I forget how that case ended with the wedding cake. Yeah, can you restrict business in that way if you don't advertise ahead of time?
This is now and that's then. So.
Right. But still, I mean, it's the same idea. Okay. we'll stop here for today. We continue next time. And happy Mother's Day to all the mothers out there.
How's your
And have a
father?
good rest of the day.
How's your
Huh?
father? How's your father?
Oh, thank you. He's doing much better. My mom and dad were at my house over still today, and but they'll be able to move back to the Ring House later today. So thanks for asking.
Good week, everybody.